Not one but two potentially priceless rarities have found their way into Dr. Frankenbite's laboratory this week. Both childhood dream mountain bikes, both from the early 90s. We've got the 1991 Kona Explosif and the 1994 Specialized S-Works, both made out of Prestige, which was probably the highest end steel material at the time. Both in need of a bit of renovation, but one certainly more so than the other. It's very fair to say that the Explosive is in almost time capsule condition with very little needing doing to it. The S-Works is another story. It has been butchered over the years, not least this grotesque fork that some comedian has put on it. It does have a smattering of first generation XTR, which this would certainly be a Fabergé egg if it hadn't been kept in a undersea mausoleum for the last few years, but I think we can make something of it. And of course this ultra rare titanium stem. So there's definitely potential in this S-Works, but it is going to require some attention. The Kona, however, will require far less attention. So if you want to see them both renovated, they're not going to be done in the same video. You're going to have to hit subscribe below. The Kona is probably the one I'm going to do first because I think it's going to be a fairly easy job making this into something very special. First, a bit of backstory on this Explosive. Just like the Dynatech Titanium that I built very recently on this channel, this was another childhood dream to pretty much any rider in the 90s. It was right at the high end of Kona's range at the time, probably beaten only by the Hot, which was the same bike with the Suntour XC Pro group set, and of course the legendary Hey Hey, which was titanium and so expensive that really, unless you were a millionaire or a sponsored pro rider, you were never going to see one in the flesh. This, however, while not attainable, was something that you might actually see in real life. You don't see many of them, certainly nowadays, and this one from 91, 29 years old, is in incredible condition. That said, there are a few signs of an interesting backstory, which we'll take a little look at now. Really, the only things on this bike that are not completely catalogue original are these scratch and sniff tyres, which are Kona tyres, but they're from probably later in the 90s, and these Yeti grips. Now, tyres and grips are consumables anyway, so you wouldn't really be surprised that they've been replaced at some point by the rider. Apart from that, everything is, as you saw in the catalogue, full XT group set, including the shark fin, the smoothest XT free hub I have ever seen. This is incredible. These XT rear mechs, obviously lovely bits of kit. Interestingly as well, just like my Dynatech, the XT shifters have still got those packaging stickers on them. When that's peeled off, this will be as new underneath. So that's a real collector's piece. Weirdly, somebody at some point has put DX cantilevers on. Now, they look exactly the same, except this black triangle on the XT is slightly raised, like a plastic disc, whereas on the DX it's a sticker. Also, you can tell by this shiny silver bolt on the DX is more of a sort of a black sphere on the XT, and it says XT on the pads. Very strange that somebody would downgrade XT cantilevers for DX ones which look almost identical, unless maybe they got nicked at some point. But apart from that, this thing is pretty much time capsule, right down to the original Avocet saddle, which is absolutely beautiful. And a little bit of shoe polish should bring that up as new. It's certainly not torn anywhere. A couple of slightly curious things. First of all, this velocity stem has been raised by about an inch from where it's supposed to sit. I can understand why. I think anybody except a super lean racing snake would probably find the very long throw, stretched out, racy position quite uncomfortable, especially if you have a bad back. That was something that was interesting about these Konas. These Joe Murray designed Konas were the first cross-country bikes that had this really sort of low sloping top tube, long stem, stretched out geometry. And the reason for that was cross-country racing in those days had much more emphasis on hill climbing as well as going downhill quickly. Aerodynamics also were a factor, and of course therefore what the pros wanted, all of us kids that read the magazines also wanted. The longer, lower and meaner looking, the better. So somebody will have bought this because it looked sexy and then thought it's not particularly comfy and tried to raise the stem to make their life a bit easier. But in doing so, what they've done is stretched all the cable housings and kinked all of the cable lines and made the braking slightly creaky. So that is something that I can very quickly fix just by dropping the stem back down. The second thing that is rather curious is this thing's obviously been owned at some point by an American. I don't know how it found its way to the UK, but the brakes are wired the wrong way around that should be front and that should be back, or vice versa, and somebody's done it wrong. So that's going to give someone a shock when they jump on, but that's also very easily fixed. Next thing is this original Joe Murray Project 2 fork. I've got a later model of this on one of my S-Works hardtails in the laboratory. This is an original one, you can tell because it has a much lower clearance here. What was interesting about the Explosif is it was meant to be spec'd with the higher end Track 2 fork in 1990 and 91, but I think there was a product recall around this time, so they ended up, a lot of them, on the shop floor with Project 2 forks on. I have never seen a Track 2 fork anywhere other than a mountain bike magazine, so I guess they didn't catch on, but of course the Project 2 has become legendary. Next curiosity, which I think is cool, is this BioPace chain set. As you can see, oval rings, which came back into fashion a few years ago. Notably, Chris Froome won the odd tour using oval chain rings, as I believe did Brad Wiggins. This was, in 91, the final year of the original BioPace, because at the time they fell from favour. I think, again, it was pressure from the magazines. People were claiming they contributed to dodgy knees. Certainly I had one in the 80s and thought it was the coolest thing ever. These XT BioPaces are probably worth a few quid now, because most people in 91 would have been specifying round chain sets. And finally, which was an option in this model year, is this stealthy black finish. It's going to need a polish because it does not look great, especially in under this floodlight. This particular model year, you had the option in the catalogue to specify any model of Kona to be finished in black instead of the original colour. So whoever chose this Explosif obviously decided to do that. I don't know whether I would necessarily have done that, but you're going to have to admit, when it's all finished and cleaned, it's going to look pretty amazing. This bike isn't actually mine, it belongs to a wealthy gentleman collector in London who is about to see his investment portfolio skyrocket in value. There's really very little I need to do to it here in my workshop, apart from a bit of inspection and authentication before it goes to its new owner. It's just a case of finishing touches really, and a bit of a clean-up. looking at the paintwork in daylight, it's not actually in the best of shape. So I'm going to have a crack at it first of all with T-Cut, and then I'm going to give it a top coat of this Frame Builders Top Wax. Shout out to Monkey Shred and Old Shovel, also on YouTube, for putting me onto this stuff. They use it already to great effect. This is going to be my first time, so let's see how it works out. A lot of you liked my pro tip about hairspray and rubber grips on handlebars. Here's another hair and beauty themed tip from the pros workshop: cotton buds. So if you soak the tip of one of these with oil or WD-40 or some kind of rust treatment, then you can get inside things like any stainless bolt heads that have started to corrode. You can see these ones here on the stem. Give that a good going over with WD-40, and also crank bolts do tend to get a bit corroded. It's pretty much the only way of getting at the rust. And there it is, a very brief project this time because it really didn't need that much. Nice boot polish on the saddle, auto sol of course on all these gorgeous original Shimano parts, all the XT bits gleaming, finished off with things like crank caps, dropped the stem to its correct position and sorted out the brake cables. So it's now running and looking good as new. I'm extremely pleased with that and sad to see it go.